What's going on, folks? Welcome back to D-Life HD. This is Victor, and I'm joined here with
Sam!
And we are going to be reviewing Metroid Dread, the 5th installment in the 2D franchise. I've never really played through a Metroid game before, but Sam, on the other hand, is basically a pro. So it's going to be a pro and a noob, and we're going to see where it takes us. So without any further delay, let's jump right into it.
Switch it up. Switch it up. I was a worker, had to upgrade to a boss. I had to switch it up. Used to live in the hood, but had to upgrade to a loft. I had to switch it up.
As Victor said, we're going to be jumping into Metroid Dread today with a full review. And we did already release a impressions video on the channel, but this is going to be much more in-depth, going over all of the content as much as we can with all our thoughts. So, to start off, Victor, what did you think of your first Metroid game?
Well, to clarify, I did own the 3DS Metroid game, Samus Returns. I know they flipped the subtitle around, because this is a remake of the second game, which is called Return of Samus, if I'm not mistaken. I did play that game, and I did not play it all the way through, though. I got a chunk of the way through and actually traded it in to GameStop in order to buy my Switch originally back in 2018. And I really regret that because, honestly, playing Metroid Dread has reminded me a lot of that game and my experiences with it because it is done by the same team. So I do have a little bit of background with it, the franchise that is, as well as playing the Prime games, playing the multiplayer on the second one. So basically a noob, but like Sam said, this is really my first experience playing a Metroid game. So I sat down and I played all the way through, and I actually made a pact. I mentioned this a couple of different times, once on my impressions and then once on my unboxing, that I made a pact to put the game in the system and not take it out until I beat the game, because I really wanted to have a Metroid game under my belt. So that's what I did, and I have to say, it was well worth it and really makes me curious about going back and playing the old games, because this was honestly such an amazing title, something that I would praise highly amongst the other best Switch games, things like Mario Odyssey, I would say Fire Emblem Three Houses, Switch exclusive experiences. As far as Metroid goes, Metroid Dread that is, it is a top tier experience in my opinion. And I think part of what allowed me to really actually dive into this game and really experience it fully and see it to the end rather than just start it like I've started many other Metroid games is the fact that I played through Hollow Knight. Now, this was back in 2018 that I played through Hollow Knight, and I loved that game. It really helped me understand what Metroidvanias do and like become familiar with that formula of gathering all these different powers and items as you go to progress and backtrack and go to new areas that you didn't have access to before. Like that exploration in a 2D environment while unlocking new abilities, even to the last little bit of the game, is something that I didn't understand. Like starting off in any of these style games, any game that is inspired by Metroid, you basically have nothing. And I didn't like that. It didn't jive with me. But Hollow Knight, its atmosphere was something that really clicked with me at first. And so I was drawn in because of the music and because of the basic combat. And I was able to understand that formula. So then picking up my first 2D Metroid attempt at playing since I beat Hollow Knight, I was really familiar with what the game was going to do and how it was going to lead me along. And so I think that it allowed me to understand the appeal and really see it to the end without stopping.
Wow. To take it one step further, I actually vowed not to even close the game until I had beaten it 100%.
Wow.
The last time I did that was with Kirby Planet Robobot. I don't know why, but sometimes I just get a game and I'm like, I have to make myself play this all the way through with no distractions. Definitely felt that way with Dread. It's kind of funny, though, that you said, you played Samus Returns first. Return of Samus is one of my favorite Metroid games, even though it's not really that well loved in the community. It's an integral part of the story, arguably the most important part of the story, and it's definitely good that they made a remake of it, but at the time, I just wasn't able to pick it up, even though I'm a huge Metroid fan. That I remember that was just such a tragic feeling. I was like, I have to be mature, I have to be an adult, and this isn't just a cost I'm going to have to pay is not to be able to play this game. So, when Dread came out, I went into it more blind than most people, probably, because I didn't even really watch gameplay from Samus Returns in the hopes that one day I'd be able to play it. So, now, after beating Dread, I'm actually playing Samus Returns, and I am just amazed how much of it is in Dread, because I had no idea. Like, animations, sound effects, free aim, the Aeon abilities, the counter, it's just all in there. The pulse scan, it's amazing how much stuff got carried over, and I just had no idea. When I was playing Dread, I was like, oh, these are all new ideas, but apparently not.
Yeah, then that's something that I was able to carry over from playing, like, as far as the general flow of combat goes. I think Samus Returns definitely grabbed me a lot more so than the other games because of how fine-tuned everything was. Like, the ability to freeze in one place and aim around, that was not in any other Metroid game, right?
No.
Right, and I really like that, being able to freeze in one place and freely aim around by holding down the left bumper is something really cool. And the counter attack I think works really well. Some people say that it got a little repetitive, and Samus Returns, some people have that same opinion for Dread, but I think it was added an element of melee, which is, I prefer melee combat over ranged combat in games, and that's part of also why Hollow Knight drew me in. And so adding that element of close quarters combat, I think, is really epic, and I was really excited to see that carry over. But honestly, like, I think that Samus Returns was just them testing the waters to see if people would jive well with what Dread was going to do.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think they fine-tuned quite a bit. Playing Samus Returns, I'm already feeling some of the annoyances. For one, I think the melee counter actually is really overused because pretty much every enemy in that game has a counter, and they will just heavily use it. So you basically have to use it or you're going to get totally killed, which is not really true to the original game. But in Dread, there were just certain enemies that used the counter, and not every enemy did. I thought that was much better design, just so that you're kind of mixing up your toolkit a little bit. It actually does remind me of Doom, because the melee counter lets you regain really large amounts of health and ammunition, which is a little bit OP if you can just do it to every single enemy. So it kind of reminds me of the glory kills from Doom, just like sometimes you got to shoot, sometimes you got to go in with the glory kills. Kind of reminds me of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, one thing I really, really love in Dread that they did not have in Samus Returns is the slide. I think that's the best thing to ever be added to Metroid. And also just the ability to press a button and curl up into the morph ball. You could touch the touchscreen to do that in Samus Returns, but I think it's a lot better with the ZL button. There's something just so sweet, especially for speedruns, about being able to slide under something and turn right into the morph ball and then get right back out. It's just seamless. That's one of the big slowdowns for speedruns of the previous games, is having to double tap down on the D-pad to turn into a morph ball. It kind of ruins your momentum. So yeah, that is amazing. Probably the best change in my opinion.
Yeah, so let's jump into the core of the game.
Yep, sure.
So, Metroid Dread follows a decently well thought out story that is an extension of the previous releases, which is honestly not something that Nintendo does a lot of times, especially considering the giant gap of time in between Fusion and this latest installment. Because just a heads up for those who don't know, Samus Returns is a remake of the second game. I'm not sure if we said that. So that one did come out relatively recently, within the past couple years. But really, Dread is the first sequel, the first progression of the story in a very, very long time. So, what do you think as far as the story goes, as someone who's played all the other games? For me, I haven't really gotten that story. This is my first time being exposed to things like the parasite, what's called X, right?
Yes, and just so you know, I'm sure a lot of people have played the game by now or seen the marketing, but there will be very big spoilers ahead.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Just
we're
wanted
going
to get that out of the
talk
way.
about everything. For sure. So as far as extending the story goes, for me, this is more so like watching Star Wars 4 and not having seen the prequels, because you can start here, but there's more background. And it's okay to start on this fifth game, I feel like, because I don't know anything about the story, and I was able to follow it decently well and be invested in it. But also, there is that background of the prior 4 games. So how does that fit into the puzzle of this narrative?
Well, honestly, Metroid's narrative is complicated, and it's not just the games. There is a whole manga that explains quite a bit of it, and it's widely considered to be canon, uh, although somewhat contradicted in the games at times. It's generally considered to be canon, and the new game definitely seems to play into that. Um, the story, though, I thought it was amazing. I was really hoping they wouldn't go overboard with it. I wanted them to just wrap this story up in a respectful way. I was so pleased, and this gets into spoilers, but just I didn't want them to bring back the Metroids, and I didn't want them to bring back the Space Pirates, and I didn't want them to bring back Ridley, because those are all dead, and I don't really think the excuse they could definitely make to bring any of those back would be satisfying. I think having Samus face all these completely alien threats was just so satisfying. And there was some fan service. They brought back Kraid, which was fine, and they brought back the X, but that was about it. I thought that was incredibly amazing, and some of the fan service
How did
was
Kraid
just...
get on the How did Kraid get on the planet? Is it a new Kraid or what?
I definitely think it's just a new Kraid. I don't think it's like Ridley, who's an intelligent being. Kraid is just a species. I'm assuming that's just a different Kraid.
Okay, that makes sense.
But I think that was really just for the fan service above all else. But I'd rather it be him than Ridley. That just doesn't make any sense. And
just really quickly, I don't know if you had more thoughts on that, which we can get into in just a second. But as far as the bosses go, for me, I want to say, even though I haven't really delved super deep into the other games, I know the characters really well, especially because of Super Smash Brothers. And I don't feel like any of the bosses, other than the final boss, really have as much personality and like long-term, I guess, stickability with the fans. Like, because there are a lot of bosses in this game. Honestly, I don't know how many bosses are in the old games typically, but it was boss after boss towards the end, and I don't feel like a lot of them. While the fights were memorable, as characters, they're not quite as memorable, I feel like.
I think part of that is just due to the amount of time that the older games have been around, the amount of times they've had to portray them in other mediums, and the amount of time there has just been for these characters to get cemented in our minds. Not only that, I mean, for instance, I know every boss in the Super Metroid, but that's arguably just because I've replayed it so many times. Even some of the bosses in Super Metroid, for instance, there is one boss named Crocomire, who is one of my favorite bosses, but all you have to do is just make him walk backwards. He doesn't really have a life meter. You just make him walk backwards. It's kind of a simple boss, more of a set piece than a boss, really. So I actually feel like these bosses were somewhat better because they had attack patterns I feel like will hold up better upon replaying. And I think just give it some time. People will come to love these bosses, especially considering like I said, I never played Samus Returns, and I barely knew anything about it, but I did hear about the boss they put in that game, the new one, uh, and that was like, ooh, I'm excited to fight that. That even though it's just some random thing they came up with, I was like, that sounds cool. So I think these will stick around, just maybe just not the first playthrough.
Okay, so touching on the bosses a little bit further, one thing that people are really talking about as far as this game goes is the difficulty. And I think that Nintendo, especially, I don't remember the guy's name, but the guy who worked in tandem with the developers for this, and he's a long term Metroid writer, and I know that he has had this story planned out for years, from what I understand. They mentioned it in the original Nintendo Direct that this game was announced. Is this the hardest Metroid game for you?
No, it was pretty standard. I'd say these days, with the way the gaming market is, if anything is not, I wouldn't say games like this are even really just hard. I'd say they're just not easy. And I think anything that's not, beat it your first try, it holds your hand, it gives you super armor if you keep losing, I think people will just say that's hard, but it's really not. This game, it was exactly how a game should be. You fight, you learn the patterns, you get better, and the hill is just steep enough to be satisfying to overcome, but not so steep that you feel like you're wasting your time and just getting so angry. At least not for me. I know some people said they were just doing terrible and couldn't beat it, but I don't think it was really that hard.
Well, I struggled with the controls most of all for the bosses, making them hard, especially the final boss. We mentioned this over DMs, but I couldn't understand the way that the space jump works, which is an item you get towards the end of the game that allows you to infinitely jump. And what makes it different is that in games like Hollow Knight that have a double jump, or like Cuphead, you don't have to be moving the stick in the direction that you want to move. Like if your character is facing a direction and you click the double jump button, your character will double jump. In this game, you have to basically constantly be pushing the stick in the direction you want to jump, and it has to be a new direction each time while you click the button. So on the final boss, there was one part that I could not get past. In fact, this is on the second phase of the boss. In fact, the third phase of the boss I beat on my first try. And I don't think it was because I was bad. I just didn't understand the controls. I had his moves fully memorized. I just didn't understand the controls until the very end of the game. And so he shoots rockets 360 degrees, and you have to infinite jump all the way around him a couple times. And I could not figure out how to do that, and I just kept dying at that part and getting really frustrated. But other than that, there were a couple bosses that gave me some trouble besides the final boss. I think specifically of the... he's like a squid-type boss that you fight underneath the water before you get an item that allows you to freely travel in the water. And so you're constantly slow. It feels like a sleep paralysis dream. And that one I found to be very difficult because he's constantly swiping his tentacles at you, and it's just really hard to move, and you have to use your plasma beam in order to grapple onto the wall every time he does that, and the ceiling every time he does that, and it makes it really difficult with the movement. So there were parts where I genuinely struggled, but that memorization of the boss's movement was very satisfying, and I really enjoyed that. And I think you're right that the game wasn't necessarily brutally difficult, and I don't think it was designed to be brutally difficult like something of a, I hate to use this, but Dark Souls nature, where the game is just designed to be difficult. Rather, there weren't a lot of accessibility options, which I don't want to be stuck on that fact, but I think it's going to hurt the sales of the game overall. Because one thing that makes something like Super Mario 3D World sell so well is its accessibility features, allowing you to use items that make you invincible, so that way kids can play it and people who are bad at games can play it. No offense to them, but that's the case. So I think that the brutalness of not adding in an easy mode or a mode that lets you just skip the boss is going to hurt the sales of the game, but ultimately I think that's a good thing because it shows that even amongst these insane seller games, a difficult game can be in the modern era and still remotely thrive. And I really want to see this game succeed, but even though I'm okay with the difficulty, I think that the level that it's on, with not being able to be turned down in the difficulty, I think that it's going to hurt the overall sales of the game.
Well, it does have an easy mode, and that's default. And then you unlock hard mode. So if people can't beat that, then that's... I mean, I don't know. They just shouldn't play the game. But I think Metroid
well,
is
that's
always
exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying, is that most people will not be able to beat this game. That's what I think.
I think they will. It just takes some practice. But
well, people are impatient, is what I'm saying. I work at GameStop. I don't know how many times I've said that on DLife HD, but I work at GameStop, and I've had so many people say that they're not going to buy Dread because of them watching the video of a boss and seeing that it is not hand-holdy and not wanting to buy. I've had multiple guests tell me that. And because I think a lot of people are probably bad at video games. I think they don't want to necessarily play a super difficult... Well, it's not super difficult. To me, it was relatively hard for me to play, honestly. I'm not very good at video games. I like mostly strategy games that if I'm really going to do something difficult, I want it to be strategy and not just testing my reaction time. But most of the time I play pretty simple games. And then if I get really good at them, I'll turn it on hard mode. But honestly, I really liked how... I would have turned it on easy mode for some bosses. I would have, because that's the kind of person I am. I don't feel guilty for turning a game on easy mode. When I first got into the Doom franchise, I believe my first playthrough of Doom 2016 was on easy. And I'm okay with that. But there's some part of me that was okay and somewhat satisfied by the end of the game that it wouldn't allow me to turn it on easy mode, even just for one boss.
Let me explain the philosophy of Metroid, and it fits perfectly within the system of a set difficulty. And that is, items are scattered around. You have to find the items. Some people will argue that there actually are accessibility options as far as how easy it is to find the items due to things like the map and the pulse scan, being able to just find items. But you can really build your own difficulty settings by searching for items. If you're having a hard time, you can go back, find more energy tanks, find more missiles. It's really customized, and I think if you have a majority of the items, some of the bosses are a pushover. So that's kind of the cool thing about the Metroid games, is they've always been customizable. If you're not good at battle, you should spend more time exploring. And if you're really good at fighting, then you don't need to spend as much time exploring. But the cool thing is, if you are bad at battling and you start exploring, a lot of the items will test your abilities and make you have to get really good with the controls. And as you expand your arsenal, you will actually get more comfortable with the controls and you'll grow as a player. It's all about growth. And if you put it on easy mode, that would really just compromise what the series stands for. And that's one of the reasons people were so upset when they added casual mode to Fire Emblem, was because the whole point of Fire Emblem is to grow close to your units, to be careful and cautious with your decisions, and to weigh the odds. And that sort of undermines everything the series stands for. It really takes away from the experience. So a lot of times I don't think gatekeeping is a great thing for series. I think everyone should enjoy stuff, but I also think people should know their limits, and there are certain rewards that are really just should be held aside for people who are willing to put in the effort to try to beat a game, try to find the items. And Metroid's all about that, because it even goes further by giving you better endings depending on how fast you are, how many items you get, it really rewards you for how much you want to put into it. I think it's an extremely customizable experience. It's just not a toggle. It's really down to how you play it.
I played Fire Emblem on casual mode.
Roasted! Sorry, dude. It's fine. I didn't. No offense. I guess you just need to get good.
If you lose all, I know this is a little bit of a tangent. I was wondering if you lose all of your units in Fire Emblem, do you just lose that profile?
I have no idea because I've never done that, but I would. I don't know. I think I have no idea. Honestly, I have no idea.
I've always wondered that, like.
I think it can get unbeatable, but I'm not 100% sure.
It can, because there was one time where I didn't grind enough. Somehow I beat the level, but there was one time when I didn't grind enough, and if you get into a battle and you didn't grind enough, you're stuck in that battle. True story. Anyways, back to Metroid. I just used the two crutch words. When I started the game, I was thinking about the fact that it is a 2D game, full priced, and a lot of times that's frowned upon. And things, especially like Link's Awakening, but I think that it was well worth $60, especially for the experience. It was very, what's the word, atmospheric. And I don't typically play games with headphones, but I really wanted to for this one. And all the different areas, like there was just so much attention to detail that even though it was a 2D game, it was well worth the 60 for me. I mean, worth it for me to even buy the amiibo before I knew if I liked the game even. Just from looking at it, I knew that I was going to enjoy it. And on that note, as far as the attention to detail goes, the Emmys in the game, which are these mechanical contraptions, some with various powers, are hunting you down in particular areas. And it adds this new element that, as far as I know, is not present in any other Metroid game, where you're sort of creeping and sneaking about trying to make it through the area without getting attacked by the Emmy. In the Emmy, this mechanical robot can one-shot you, so if it catches you, it's game over. And it adds almost this horror element. And there's something about robots and horror, like mechanical horror, that just is absolutely terrifying to me. And like the way that it moves, how it can like stick to the ceiling and move its legs two ways, like it can move it all the way up and then flip all the way back around. You just have to see a video of it. I'm sure Daniel will put it on screen. But it's freaky, man, and for a rated T game, and it was such an awesome experience to go through these darkened areas, and they add like this film grain on the Emmy areas, and like try to sneak about, and going back to like the slide and morph ball mechanics. You're sort of like hopping about and platforming, trying to be quiet so that this robot doesn't come over and one-shot you. And it literally like stabs Samus with a metal rod of some kind. It's pretty graphic.
There actually was somewhat of a similar segment to Metroid Fusion where you would be chased down by Samus's suit of armor, but it was nowhere near to this extent. Definitely not as fleshed out, but it was pretty much the same level of scare factor, I'd say. And actually, there is a chance to get out of the encounter if you get captured by the enemy. You have a very brief window on a randomized timer each time. My record was 3 in a row.
Yeah, I think I managed to get away maybe once or twice, but I honestly never really tried.
Dang, why?
Because I was like, I'll just load back immediately.
It's later on, I feel like it's kind of necessary. You just try to escape and then slide under. It's awesome.
Whoops. I don't really I don't analyze games very well, like, and understand the way that it tries to teach me things, which is why sometimes I'm kind of a terrible reviewer. But Yeah, certain functions of the games aren't really evident. I didn't know that that was something you could cause. Like, I thought that was just random.
It gives you a tutorial early on that says when the light flashes, press the button.
If it was early on, I probably forgot about it.
Nice.
Honestly, there was a couple times where I closed the game out when I got an item because I was like, all right, that's a good checkpoint, I guess. And I'd come back the next day and I'd be like, wait, what did I even get? And then I would try to find the tutorial and I'd have to redo it because I wouldn't know. But there's a lot to remember in that game. Like, the controls, they're not clunky at all, but getting used to them is a clunky experience because you're holding different combinations of triggers and bumpers, and it's fun to get used to. But like, I can say my ability to remember the controls definitely got me killed quite a few times.
Yeah, it does really test you, especially for me knowing like all the old Metroid controls and just trying to get used to these new ones. It was like, this is really hard. I feel like we should probably talk about the graphics, music, all that, so we can wrap it up here since we've been rambling about the story and the gameplay and all that.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of leaning into with the whole 2D nature of the game.
Well, this is the first 2D Metroid game since Fusion, which came out in the early 2000s, so that's crazy. And it's also the first continuation of the story since then. So it's just a huge landmark title. But here's the question. How do you take a game that's a sequel to a game on the Game Boy Advance, one with a history of pixelated graphics, and bring it to the modern era? Great question. You make it look exactly like this because this game is absolutely gorgeous to look at. One of the shining examples of graphics on this little tiny tablet that they call the Nintendo Switch. You try to bring over another game to Switch, it's going to look garbo compared to its console big brothers, but when you can make an original experience for the Switch that utilizes the hardware so well, it can be a truly amazing thing. What do you think? Were you a big fan of the graphics?
Trash. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I love them a lot. I think I'm leaning more into like the enemy designs and sort of the individuality of all the different characters, especially like Samus's new blue suit design. Like, I think everything looks really clean, and the transition over to 3D started on the 3DS game, but was ultimately mastered on this one. And I think that didn't this game technically start off as a DS game?
I was originally a concept for DS, but I don't think it got very far along.
And I would have assumed back on DS it wouldn't be pixel art even. I would assume they would have... and that transition would have been natural going from the Game Boy Advance over to the DS. So it's interesting to see that transition over the 20 years into this 2D, 3D art style. But everything's really shiny, and all of the individual enemies and their different attacks they do. Like, I think later in the game where there's these certain enemies that spit black goop everywhere. It's really reflective, and the environments are very separate from each other. Every single area you're going to is very different. Like, one section of the game that's like Camino from, going back to Star Wars here, from Star Wars. It's this sort of flooded, rainy area. That's where you fight that water boss I was talking about. And then there's one segment of the game where everything gets frozen and you're going through all these ice areas and like really hot, fiery areas. Everything, while being isolated and being underground and sort of going through these mechanical type chambers, everything sort of breathes life, and it works really well in this 3D style. 3D, 2D style, and I'm a big fan, honestly. I had to get used to the fact that Samus's character model is really small. Is it just me, or does her character model seem small compared to the old games?
Probably a little bit smaller, but the camera was sort of dynamic with the zoom ins and zoom outs. I don't know. I played it on the TV, so I didn't have really much of a problem with that.
Yeah, I mainly played on my monitor and it was okay, but when I tried to play in handheld, I feel like Samus was just really tiny. Whereas, like, I booted into Super Metroid on the SNES Online app, and the camera's really close. And I get that they want you to be able to see things, see areas off in the distance that you'll be able to visit later through walls, and like see what's above you and see what's under you. But I think it's ironic that this game came out alongside the OLED Switch, which is primarily going to be used for handheld with that new screen, when I think this works a lot better as a console game than a handheld game.
I would agree. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And the music, I really like the usage on the menu of the classic theme, and I kind of wish they had added like Bryn Star's theme somewhere in the game, which I don't think they did. That it wouldn't really make
I'm
any sense.
so glad they got rid of all of the. Actually, they did. There was a temporary use of Lower Bryn Star from Super Metroid, but that was very brief. But I'm so glad they just didn't reuse music, honestly. There were some really annoying reuses of music in Samus Returns. It's like all Prime sound effects, which is super jarring because what does Prime have anything to do with Samus Returns? Unless you consider the fact that the Prime games technically take place between Metroid 1 and 2, so I guess that kind of makes sense, but there were so many Prime tracks used in Samus Returns. I was so glad to hear some original compositions. And actually, I am 90% sure that the Emmy Zone song is a remix from Metroid 2. So I thought that was awesome. That they reused a kind of obscure track.
Wow.
But as far as music goes,
I think the yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I didn't think it was the best soundtrack. I thought it was kind of weak. I thought some areas were good. I liked Dairon a lot. I thought that was a really great song. But I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of the music in this game. I thought it was pretty weak.
Yeah, honestly, there's not a lot that stands out to me other than like the ending of the game, the song it gives you with the credits. That's not something from another game, is it?
I don't believe so. I didn't recognize it.
Yeah. I didn't think so. I liked that song. That made me feel awesome at the end. And then the escape song, which that timer is if you don't know where you're going, that timer is not very much for the ending. That end song was really good. The final boss song was pretty good and intense for a final boss, but otherwise, I honestly don't really remember much of the soundtrack, which is kind of sad. But the game uses a lot of sections with no music or like ambiance or something like that. So it's all about atmosphere, I feel like, and I feel like I've used that word quite a few times, but honestly, that's just what comes to mind when thinking about the game.
Man, Metroid 2 has the most ambient soundtrack up to now, and I feel like Dread is actually kind of a Metroid 2 tribute in some ways, but I'd probably have to get into that another time. But I don't think the name Dread, and I don't think that the theme of the Emmys and everything, really, the music just didn't fit it. I think of the song from the beginning of Metroid Prime where you're wandering around the Orpheon, and it's like a wrecked space pirate ship, and you just find all these dead pirates and the Parasite Queen. The song at that part is just so dread-inducing, and I really wish they would have brought back something like that, like music that actually made you feel like there was a weighty situation going on. I don't know, man. I really would have liked that. Think it could have been a lot better, but graphics were good. Music was kind of meh. So I would have. I don't know. Part of me kind of wishes I could have flipped it.
Yeah, I suppose so. Metroid has a good soundtrack, one of my favorites, even though I don't really know much about the franchise, I would say.
And man, actually, you said the menu music was good, and I do agree that the music was good, even though I only heard it one time. But I thought the menu was kind of weak.
What? It was just like Super Metroid.
No, it wasn't like Super Metroid. Super Metroid has a really slow close-up of the Metroid, and then a really slow close-up of the dead scientists, and then it says the year that the game came out. It says Nintendo. It says Metroid 3, and then it zooms out and says Super Metroid, and the theme hits. I am so disappointed they didn't make that menu actually say Metroid 5. That was just in the marketing, and that was super disappointing because every Metroid game up till now has said the number in the title screen.
Maybe it does, and it's hidden.
No, it doesn't. I waited and waited and waited.
I was more referring to like when you get into the menu and like how the Samus helmet turns when you start the profile. And...
Oh, no, that was amazing. I thought that was great. I was like, oh, nice.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't really show you much because it was leaving you anticipating what was going to be in the game.
Okay, but neither did Super Metroid, and that was amazing. And they could have easily just made it say Metroid 5 and then shown the title. I don't know, man. And also, just think of how cool the Metroid Prime menu is. Will that menu ever be outdone? Seriously.
I don't know.
It's so good it has 2 menu songs.
So, let's wrap this up. Where would you place this in the Metroid ranking, your personal ranking?
I think I already ranked the game somewhere, but my personal ranking would go Super... And then Dread and Fusion would be pretty tied up. And then 2 and then 1. And I guess Zero Mission is also in there somewhere.
Wow. I'll have to say it's number 1 for me. And that's my list.
That's because you've only played it.
Yeah, that was the joke. Ha. Yeah, I think that this is easily top 10 Switch games. If I was to do like top 5 Switch exclusive experiences, so that even cuts out Breath of the Wild, probably in the top 5.
Nice.
I really enjoyed it. I have to say, I didn't want to put it down. I beat the game within the first week. I know it's not a super long a game. It ended up running me about 12 hours in total, and I did not 100% it.
It's brutal to 100%. There are just a couple of challenges that will make you want to rip your hair out and learn to cuss.
All right, well, I think this has been a pretty intense, long-form review here. There's a lot we didn't cover because there's a lot you should go experience if you have not played the game. Of course, we did spoil a couple things here, so I hope people that have played the game enjoyed hearing us ramble about the experiences that are inside waiting for you. So it's definitely a nice package, well worth the $60. And if you come across it on sale somehow, which you probably won't, snag it because I think it's one that down the line it's probably going to sell about as well as the previous ones. I'd hope more, but these Metroid games tend to keep their value, so buy it now. It might be worth something down the line, I feel like.
Spoiler alert, if you collect all of the items and beat the game in under 30 minutes, Metroid gets a girlfriend at the end of the game.
Dude. Now we're going to have to demonetize the video for spoilers.
Well, all right,
Wow.
guys. Hope you enjoyed this review. Thanks for joining me and my brother Victor here today on the D-Life channel. If you want to keep talking with us about Metroid Dread, you can always comment below or join our community Discord where we get up to all kinds of shenanigans every day. Until next time, remember to always stay one up, and we'll see you later.
Also, Metroid can crawl.